Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Super excited to have you back. Have you join us for another episode. And I'm super excited about today's episode and just wanted to check in, see how you're doing, how you guys are feeling, and hopefully, you guys are all feeling pretty good. We're getting closer and closer to the holidays, and it just feels like 2022 flew by. And I'm super excited that you guys have been with me. If you've been a long time listener, have been with me through this year. And of course, I like to get started with the general housekeeping. If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, leave a positive review via iTunes so that everyone could see the podcast. It could help a lot of other people find it. And if you found it useful in your healing process, that would be a great way to show your appreciation to a small podcast. And if you are interested in the group and individual membership coaching, please sign up in the show notes link down below. If you are interested in being on the newsletter, which goes out Friday mornings, first thing, please go to drnataliejones.com, or you can also find that link in the show notes below as well. And of course, if you're looking for support, free support from other folks that are in recovery from abusive or narcissistic relationships, visit the Facebook group, A Date with Darkness. All right. So today's guest is a special guest, and I'm going to dive right in here. She's been on the show before, and I love interviewing her, Dr. Sherrie Campbell. And Dr. Sherrie, I just love having her because Dr. Sherrie gets it, and it's always such a vibe when you talk with someone who gets it. And she's back today, as promised, when we did our last podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, be sure to go back and listen to it. And today we're going to, talk a little bit more in depth about her book, Adult Survivors of Toxic Family Members. All right, here she is. Hello, welcome to the show, Dr. Sherrie. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be back.
It
We got our
is nice.
tendencies out. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I love it. So for the listeners who are just now tuning in, tell us who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work. And I love, love, love the animal print glasses and the pink hair. I'm just feeling it. It's like a vibe.
It's such a vibe. I'm doing a middle part. I don't know. It's a whole thing right now. Um, I'm Dr. Sherrie, and I'm the leading expert probably in the world right now on cutting ties or giving permission to cut ties with toxic family. And I think that it's something that isn't talked about in culturally open space. And the idea that all parents are good is sort of a monolithic uh, narrative that is false, but that is seen in all of our advertising, our storybooks, our commercials, our holiday movies. We're very indoctrinated into it. And I was a child that grew up under two very abusive parents, and
Mhm.
that narrative never fit for me. And I chose to turn my perpetrators into a purpose. And I write lots of books, and I'm a pretty powerful influencer on social media for the voiceless. So I'm here to bring voice to the voiceless.
I like that. Dr. Sherrie, can you tell us, how long has it been since you've sort of cut ties with your own family of origin?
So with my mother, she took a little longer for me.
Mm.
Since I was 45, I'm 51, so 6 years. 42 with my father and sibling. So
Okay.
mhm.
So it's been some time. And Can you talk a little bit about your evolutionary process? Because you talk a lot about this in your new book, which is amazing, by the way, because I know that your podcast resonated, the last podcast we did resonated with a lot of people. And there's people that sort of romanticize and think about doing this, but then they're
Yes.
worried about sort of the aftermath and just picking up the pieces of themselves afterwards. So can you talk a little bit about that for you?
Yeah, so adult survivors of toxic family members is covers the whole aftermath because I thought I was so cute. I thought that once I cut ties, it was over, and it was actually far from over. My family became sadistically abusive after to try and scare me back. Um, not because they want to scare me back to repair the relationship, but because they liked and need to have a scapegoat. And toxic families all have to have a scapegoat. So there were many years, the first 4 years, that uh, shook me to my core, some of the abuses that I went through, from sadistic gifts sent here with missing pieces, or they were broken with no gift receipt. So I'd have to break the no contact. They manipulated information around my own father's death. Um,
Mm,
they did some interesting stuff on my daughter's 16th birthday. So you have to prepare for what you see, and I give sort of footprints in the snow in front of you that weren't there for me, on how to navigate gifts and fake sentiment. And I was manipulated out of a monies left to me by my grandmother that, I chose to walk away from. I give an actual template of the letter I wrote to the lady in the trust, who became involved, and not objective. And walking away isn't for everyone when it comes to monies. It's very situation dependent, but the book covers all of that. But mostly it's just recovering and moving out of toxic shame and this belief that, you are bad and your parent is good,
yeah.
and that you have obligations and your parents have rights. I would imagine the more vulnerable, unskilled person should have the rights, and that the parents would have the obligations as they chose to bring a child into this world. So if they're going to take that responsibility for someone so vulnerable, I believe that parents have rights and children, or that parents have obligations and children should have all the rights. Um, you get into a space where you're
Mm,
consumed with shame as your parents are dumping all their disorders, their unpredictable moods, and their own low self worth all over you. So you carry it and you can be labeled as bad. So when you decide to cut ties, you let go of this giant umbrella of you have a family. So not only do you get kickback from your family members and then the close friends of the family members, but the larger
mm-hmm,
culture goes, but it's your family. How could you do that? Um, it
mm,
seems to be the worst coming from child to parent. It seems that when adults cut off a toxic adult child that perhaps they enabled or did too much for from a good hearted space, cut ties, that seems to be like a hard life lesson for that toxic adult
yeah.
child. But when you're raised by a toxic adult child, as I was raised by two, and I cut them off because of my lowly position as the child, I am considered bad by society. So I do a lot in this book around recovering from that toxic shame and gathering your voice to be used for you and the people close to you. But you don't want to waste your voice on family members that are going to continue to refuse to hear it.
Thank you for being so candid and breaking that down. One of the pieces that strikes me and that I like that you went into that not a lot of people really cover is the death of the parent and sort of how the siblings and other family members sort of lurch in, and then also around the money, the trust or will or things like that. And I'm curious, about that process because, I personally think there should be more protection around trust and things like that. It's mind-boggling to me how much there's not enough protection and you don't really know that until you're in it. And it's, you have to be the one to sort of prove things before they look into it. And then after
Mhm.
that, there's so much expense. So I'm curious around, your thoughts around that process, or, even when a parent dies, or even, and before we even get into that, maybe it's around money, because there's a lot of people that I know that have, and that I've worked with, that have been willed money by a grandparent or some family member, and parents or other people took that money and used it,
Mhm.
without you knowing about it. So I'm curious about that process.
Yeah, so I was blocked out of a will. The way the will was written was that my parent and the bank would be equal partners in deciding how monies would be dispersed. So unfortunately, the way my grandmother wrote it up, I don't think she prepared for my mother to hijack it. Um, and there were a lot of things like I was become aware that the will was actually uh, my brother was always involved and I was never included.
Mm,
And they made up some interesting excuses why I wasn't receiving anything for the past 10 years. When I saw that my brother was already taking large disbursements of money out for a high school for his kid, I asked for equal disbursements for my daughter to be placed in their bank in an account that they would see I would not use. And I was
mm,
ghosted. In fact, I wasn't even responded to. I was ghosted. People did not believe me, though those closest to me was so surreal for them that this was happening that they thought so I went and saw an attorney, not because I was in doubt, but because at some point I needed evidence for those who were wanting me to go fight for it because they didn't believe I was truly being locked out of it. So I went
mhm,
to an attorney and I recorded the session because even then people still want to whitewash that all parents are good and they wouldn't mean to do this, or no parent would be that hateful to take a college education from their granddaughter because she's mad at you. So when I was able to go to the attorney and waste that money in a way because I wasn't going to go after the trust, but to prove to people that I had to take that step is probably the part that made me the most sad. But I do understand that you become a parent and you get to wear a good suit. But if you're an abuser before becoming a parent, having a label of parent doesn't by osmosis make you a good person. Now you can abuse, label it parenting and get
mm,
away with it. So I did that. I went to an attorney and I recorded the session and was able to show that it was not worth it. I'd have to hire an attorney in another state. I mean, I probably would have ended up spending half of what I was going to get anyway. So
mhm.
it was more hurtful for me because I didn't, the money was one thing, but it was just so twisted for me to absorb
Yes.
that my own family would do that to my daughter. I mean, it wasn't coming to me, it was coming to my kids. So that blew me away that they wanted power so bad that they were going to starve the love of my life of something left to her by her grandmother, who was the first female surgeon to graduate from medical school as a surgeon in New York City. So she was all about education. So I'll do it. I'll put my kid through college. But it was the shock of how savage the abuse was. And that was the hardest for other people. Now, I treat people whose parents are very close to death or they're very much lost their facilities. And it's not right for them to like cut ties at that point when there's monies to be gained.
Mm,
The parent isn't, they're almost in, they're like in a home. They're not really functioning, they're still abusing, but it's like so close to the end that, and everybody has to find in their own heart. We're also taught that if our parents die, we have to feel guilty.
mm,
Um, Parents aren't taught that because we hopefully don't lose our child before we lose our parent, but children are taught, even in healthy dynamics, that you have to feel guilty, that you weren't a perfect child when your parent
Mhm.
passes. So at the death, I went through this. I was told about a year and a half prior to his death that my father was ill. My mother contacted somebody close to me. And when that man said, I'm happy to tell Sherrie, but I would like to have some detail on his illness, if I'm going to deliver this type of information, she goes, nope, she can contact me if she wants any details.
Mm.
So I really didn't need closure with my father. His last words to me before he hung up on me were a physical threat to put me in a hospital.
Wow.
Uh, and so I thought, wow, those are going to be his last words to me. I'm not going to mend the fence. I've done that my entire life, and I've always gone back to get more of this. And then it went on, and I never heard anything. And I would Google his name, and I'd see that his social media was still up. And then my hips began hurting really bad out of nowhere, like so bad. And I have a very high tolerance for pain that I was looking up. I was about to get an MRI. Like I feel like an old lady girl. I was waking up like, like what
Wow.
is wrong with me? So I looked up in a book that's on psychoneuroimmunology, hip pain, and it said stubborn lumps of anger at parents. So I'm like, I'm not feeling angry, but I was like, well, I haven't checked, his social media in a bit. It was still up. I went on Google, boom, obituary.
Mm.
He had died 2 weeks prior, and his service was in 2 days. Um, the truth will come out. It came through my body. I
Mm.
found out. And then I was looking in my messages in an iPhone because my daughter was going to start driving classes, and I was looking for the number. So I
Okay.
went into the blocked messages, which I didn't know you could have.
Yeah.
And there was a voicemail, and I won't say who that person is, letting me know that my father had passed.
Wow.
And I'd already found out. So one thing I want to tell all survivors is the truth is never not the truth. And it will always bubble up. And I found out, and that person let me know that they were threatened not to tell me. Threatened. And she couldn't hold it. And so she chose to leave me a message. But the fact that my sibling and mother would threaten people not to tell me that my own dad died, regardless of whether I saw or talked to him before his death or not, is
Mm.
abuse. So I chose not to reach out to him. I was given his information and then also told that he didn't want to be contacted. I had more than one person contact me that he was sick. And to all of them, I said, I appreciate the information. But for my father to call on me
Mhm.
as if I'm the maker he has to meet at the
Mhm.
1 yard line of his life, when he had an entire lifetime with me and 7 years past the time he hung up on me and threatened to put me in a hospital to fix it, made me realize that this was still abuse. He was making me responsible for him crossing over and being good. So I'm not his maker. Whether he had fixed it with me or not, it will not change his life review, if we have one, and all the abuse that I endured under him for 51 years of my life. And every part of my body felt so afraid to call him because I didn't want to tolerate even one more abusive message. Was he going to go out with another threat? And then if he was all in love with me at that point, that would make no sense to me.
Yeah.
Death doesn't change people. People who want to change is what changes people.
Mhm.
I took care of me. I wouldn't put my daughter in that scenario. If her dad had done something like that to her, it's my job to take care of me. I'm not his maker, and I didn't abuse him ever in my life. And therefore, I don't feel guilty. What I want people to understand is I just recently shared in a podcast that I grew up in the upside down. So, like a Stranger Things metaphor. Okay. Boundaries in the healthy world look like this. Hey, Natalie, you really kind of hurt my feelings when you did blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh my God, Sherrie, I'm so sorry. I will never do that again. So that means I have some access to controlling your behavior in my life, because when you're setting boundaries in the healthy world, you're setting boundaries to keep relationships, to keep them, meaning you're giving someone an opportunity to show you that they respect you. So if
Mm,
you set a boundary with someone, you're saying, hey, I want to keep you in my life. So I need you to stop doing this so that I can keep you. That's what
mm.
healthy boundaries look like. That's what the literature writes about. Well, yeah, in the upside down, when you set a boundary in a toxic person, they're like, ooh, that hurt her. I'm going to do it again and again and again and again. Then the
Mhm.
more information you're telling them, this hurts me when you do this. It hurts me when you do that. They're like, nice. They're just getting information from you on how to continue to hurt you because you're exposing your vulnerabilities.
Um,
So setting boundaries in the upside down really ends up being about self control rather than other control. So when they cross a boundary that you've set, it's not that the boundary isn't working, it's that they're looking for your attention and your emotional
yes.
reaction when they cross the exact boundary that you just set. So you have to have silence as your superpower in the upside down. Also, honor thy mother and thy father. Okay. In the right side up, in the healthy world, we have parents. They've treated us with fairness. They've
Mm,
loved and respected us our whole life and earned our love. So we have no problem honoring them because we look to them for role modeling, and they honored that position and they tried to be the best person for us with love and discipline that they could do. In
sure.
the upside down, other honoring thy mother and thy father looks like this. Your parents choose to be abusers. It's a choice. Abuse is not mental illness, it's a character problem. It is a choice.
I
Every
agree.
single person chooses how they show up in relationships and how they treat other people. It's a
Mhm.
choice. So, in the upside down, I honored both my mother and my father by their choice to be toxic. If I asked them to be different, which I begged for years for them to be different, I was not honoring their boundaries around wanting to be toxic.
Mm,
So I do believe in my heart of hearts that in the highest form of love, I'm honoring them and their choice to be toxic. I cannot live with their choice
mhm.
and be healthy. So I'm exercising my choice to have no contact. And that is the best way to honor them. Otherwise, I will be wanting to change them for the rest of my life, and they don't want to change.
I like that, and I can appreciate what you're saying. The question I have for you is, you have children,
Mhm.
and a lot of people that want to go no contact, or kind of cut the ties, if you will, have children, but they want their children to have access to their grandparents. When you cut ties, at first, was it just you, or was it you and your entire family that you married into and had yourself? Were they all 100% behind you? Were you guys a unified uh, front and did it
We are now.
together?
We are.
Okay. Yeah.
When I first cut ties, I was actually single and divorced.
Okay.
Um, and my mother hadn't really had any dynamic with my ex for about 10 years. And she went behind my back and tried to reestablish a relationship with a person she can't stand, to see my daughter behind my back and without my permission.
Mm,
And I let my ex-husband know, you do that and you will, it's not going to be a good choice because you're being manipulated. And my daughter was there when that phone call was made to him, and she's never seen my parents reach out to him, and she was actually scared.
mm,
And I was actually cut off. So My mother cut me off, and which she'd done many times, and then I'd always fix it. So this time I just realized I'd had enough. I can't fix it anymore. And it was over something so dumb. So I just let it go and wanted to see what she'd do. And we're 7 years later. But she
Mm.
started sending my daughter out of nowhere tons of videos of her dog, and she was contacting my ex-husband regularly. Um, and my daughter didn't like it. My daughter asked me if she could block my mom from sending the videos. And I said, you can do whatever you want as long as it is your choice. And to be honest with you, a toxic parent doesn't magically become a good grandparent. And what I've seen outside is that they try to manipulate your own children against you. And I talk about that in Adult Survivors because they go after all kinds of people. And then when they're not making any progress, they go after those that are the very closest to you.
I agree.
Parents will have no shame in talking bad about you to your children. So if you are going to protect yourself as if you're your own child from abusers, I do not believe you should leave your children out of that protection and leave yourself vulnerable to your parents separating and dividing you from your own children. In the fantasy world and in the holiday storybook, would it be wonderful for all kids to have grandparents? Absolutely. But if we again whitewash grandparents with that title as they can't possibly be abusers to grandchildren, but they're abusing the parent of the child, this
Mm.
lacks logic to me. An abuser abuses everyone. They abuse their children, they abuse their friends, they abuse their coworkers, they abuse everybody. They don't just abuse in one area. They just get away with it in family because they can label it as parenting. Abuse becomes parenting. I was just
Mm.
disciplining them.
Mm.
With the silent treatment for 3 weeks? What does that mean? Right? So I haven't yet seen a toxic parent be a healthy grandparent.
Yeah.
Because what they do is they may not directly like be cruel to their grandchildren,
Yes.
but they're using the child as a tool to hurt the parent. So then they
Yeah.
are abusing the child.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that have difficulty sort of reconciling how they treat grandchildren, right? Because they may perceive it as like, oh, you're treating your grandchildren better than you ever taught me. And it's good to hear you say that you feel like that's more of an intentional action that is meant to be hurtful.
Let's even say, let's take that. And yes, that's correct. If your parent fawns over your child, same sex child, especially, okay, and you never got that. So now you have to bear witness to they were always capable of loving you like that and they didn't. It creates such discord and so much pain because it then goes to why wasn't I worthy of that? What was so bad about me? My mom once said to me, man, London is so sweet and she's so easy and she's just such a good little person. I'm like, I know. She's like, yeah, some kids are just a lot easier to raise.
Mm, a backhanded
And she
compliment.
robbed me of my
Mm,
parenting and the connection. It was like it was just in her. London was just born that way. So I was born
mm,
bad and hard to raise, not my mom's fault. So
mm,
it was not a compliment and it was a dig and also said right in front of my daughter.
mm.
Okay. So it's passive aggressive. Not everybody would pick up on that. And most people would say, because we just want to believe that all parents are good, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. Yes, she did. The label of mother doesn't change that. My mom was an abuser long before I was even born.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you say to people who want to keep a grandparent around for their child. Like, okay, yes, this person was this way to me, but they're maybe not in the stage of seeing what you're talking about yet, but they desperately want their child to have some connection with their family.
What I would say to that is absolutely a choice you can make, as long as you can live with it and it's not eating you alive on the inside. Um,
Mm,
if you can do that, and I think some people can, and I think too that abuse is on a spectrum,
uh-huh.
and that maybe that abuse wasn't as intense as my abusers, right? I talk in But It's Your Family, the first book, about low contact, cordial contact, and no
Yes.
contact. I think
Yes.
no contact should be the last resort. It's a forever pain. I have a
Mm,
forever pain, because nobody wants to not have a mom and nobody wants to not have their dad. So it's a forever pain that I have, that's always
mm.
in the process of healing, because it's like losing a limb. If I became paralyzed, I wouldn't just not want my legs. Every day I'd want my legs.
Sure. But
Every
I
day
would
I wish I could walk. So,
yeah.
every day I sort of, like, one time my daughter drank this drink and she had a reaction to this drink, scared the crap out of me.
Mm,
So I was like, I've never seen, she was a giant hive. I mean, it was going into her eyes. I was so freaked out. She missed 2 weeks of school. You don't think that on the way, I wish I could have been calling my mom, even if she didn't know anything to tell me, I would have had that anchor, like, Mom, oh my God, what do I do? She's da da da, I I have nothing like that. So there is a forever pain. So if you can and it's manageable for you, like, I have a patient I treat whose mother is at the end of her life and she has been a wicked abuser her entire life, but
mm.
the mother's on her way out and the grandsons, her sons,
Yeah.
go see her once a week. And but what I'll tell you is this: in time, everyone will figure it out, including your children.
Mm,
Or you'll come home and you'll start, depending on how where they are in the spectrum of abuse, that your kids will really not want to go there, or they'll start hearing them not talking nice about the parent.
mm.
You don't have to. What I used to worry about so much was the truth. And even if it takes 10 years to come out, I promise you, what you see, because abuse is real. So if you see it, other people will see it. Now, other people might not confront it and they might not
Yes.
want to label it, but I promise you, they see it. And your kids will eventually see it if it is there. And then at that point, if your kids don't want to see grandma and grandpa as much and they're trying to set their own boundaries, let
Sure.
them, regardless of your parents' reaction to that. Listen to your kids. If they're telling you a truth that don't continue to force them to go once they start to figure that truth out.
Yeah, I like that. But I would also argue that, low contact and all of that, I still think of those as forever pains. Me personally, I think they're honestly worse
Me
than
too.
no contact because you have to do so much compartmentalizing and shrinking of yourself to just be shock absorbent, if you will, trauma absorbent, and
I think
continue
you
to soak
have
it up.
to. Any thread, and this is what I struggled with in reading
Yeah.
a lot of other books that might label parents as, like, emotionally immature.
Yes.
I mean, it's cute and that's true. And I loved the first half of the book, but I got to the second half and I'm getting another label that I have to fix. If I'm not the problem, why am I always having to fix me according to all these experts? So I do think that any thread to the abuse keeps you abused. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I tried all of those levels and none of them worked. So the only reason
Mm-hmm.
I got to no contact was because, well, low contact didn't work. And then cordial contact worked for a minute, but they want your attention and your emotional reaction. So they saw through that.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a patient that I treat who's very close to her passive father, who the family is dominated by the toxic mother. and she doesn't want to lose him. So the only way to stay connected is to have a line of tolerance to her. So we talk about gray rocking, and she just gray rocks. And is she exhausted after? Very often she is, but because she knows she's in power when she's gray rocking and pleasing behaviorally may look the same, but this is where intention does matter. When
Hmm.
you know you're doing it for self-preservation and just to keep the peace so that you can maintain a connection to your father, then I think you kind of know you're juking them and yet you're not having to lose your dad. Now, her dad, and she and I have discussed this, is abusive by proxy
Yeah.
because he's not protecting his children by staying with this woman.
I'm
Uh,
glad you mentioned that because a lot of people, that's what I always tell people. Like, if they're married to an abusive person, or if they're, then they too are also abusive. It's just usually a lesser of the two evils.
yeah, it's like he's not abusive to her directly. He loves her to death, but he has been so brainwashed that this woman can't not he has to be there. She's either going to rob him blind, or she's quite addicted to pills and alcohol. He feels like she can't make it on her own. So there's a lot of these things, like she's going to die. So in his mind, she has manipulated him and he is jujitsued. My patient sees it. She tries to talk to him about it, but he's gone. And so we've accepted that rational thought is gone. And so
Mm.
she tries to see him as much as she can without the mom, but see, the mom doesn't like not having all that access to controlling and puppeteering. But two sisters of the five have cut contact, but they have also lost their dad. And so she's in a process. I don't know where she and I will end up together in her process, but right now she feels really comfortable gray rocking, and her mom's acting out to the gray rocking a little bit. So we're just navigating it. One thing about no contact that I really want the listeners to understand is you evolve to it. It's not cancel culture. It's not
Yes.
like my mom made me mad, so I'm going to cut her off and block
Correct.
and delete from social media. Please try everything so that you don't live in maladaptive guilt. I,
Hmm.
when I was done mending the fence, I knew that day there was no skill set that brought me there. I had it, it was done. If I was going to get abused over something like this, then it was never, ever, ever, ever going to change. And I was
Correct.
45 years old. I moved states to have low contact. I did everything I could to stay connected. I really did everything I could.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to the point that enough is enough, there's peace. There's
Mm-hmm.
this feeling of like, oh, thank God it's just finally over. A lot of survivors feel relief when their parent dies,
And there's some that don't.
and some that don't. When my dad died, I was so freaked out for a couple of weeks because I felt like he could see my life now without my permission. I felt like all my boundaries went away, because
Mm.
I felt like he was in this other space that he could have full access now to my life.
Wow.
So for me to heal that, and it's still hard that your parent died, because any sliver of hope that we naturally have for parents, it's always there, even if you think it isn't or you've compartmentalized it. It was like it was totally over. And he, in no contact, felt like a statue to me. Like I knew he was on earth, but I didn't picture him moving around or like having a life. When he passed, I felt like he was walking around. He became more alive to me when he passed away for the first couple of weeks of my grieving than
Mm.
he was alive and behind my boundaries.
What do you think that was about? What do you think sort of caused that, like, magnification, if you will? Like, what was it about his passing that sort of just intensified and magnified that thought for you?
I really believe that all of those boundaries that I never ever got to have as a little girl, and I finally set them through going no contact, and that was the way I was the most heard. The only thing that I was ever heard with was silence. Because words,
Mm,
they're so good. I mean, you will never out argue a narcissist ever. So like, don't try. But I felt so safe that I had done this work and I knew his location. So when someone dies, and I don't know what everyone's experiences are, but I had a patient die in a car accident, and I had certain experiences with this patient that I cannot explain in trying to treat his parents. And I didn't imagine it. So just auspicious things. And it
yeah.
was beautiful in that scenario. And I'm a scaredy cat, so I don't like that. I just felt like I didn't, when someone dies, I didn't know really where he was or what kind of access he's had or could have to me. And I just had to reset my limits and my boundaries spiritually, like,
Mhm.
so I don't know if you know who the author of Christiane Northrup, but she writes a lot about menopause. She's an OBGYN,
She's
and
been on the show before.
I
I
love
interviewed yes, she's
her.
amazing. She's so amazing. Such a lovely
So
lady. I need to get all of you guys here, and we need to do a panel. That's
I
what we
know. So what I did from her is she said, write down the person's name and birth date,
Hmm.
and on the back, put all karmic contracts now closed, no void. So I
Mhm.
wrote that all down. She says to put it in a, like a little baggie and put it in the freezer. I burned it.
Yeah,
I did not want to house a frozen body in my freezer.
absolutely.
So I I burned it, and I felt like at that place
Yeah.
I let it go. And I believe my dad's soul will evolve. Maybe I believe he's probably in a nice long life review of all the pain he's caused, and I think he did some good in the world. I'm sure we all do some good in some way, even if it's from narcissism. Um,
Mhm.
but I needed to reestablish boundaries because I didn't want to feel like in his death that that he would kind of be like vapor and be able to see all of me. I didn't like that feeling. So boundaries, it really made me realize how safe they can make us, how important they are, why they make us such healthy people. Um, and I also thought I would maybe desire a relationship with my father in death I never got to have in life. And that surprised me that I was really okay in the dynamic that I had. And I felt very good about how I showed up and took care of me, and that I
Mm.
was never mean to him. So I feel whole in that way. But it took me several months of just kind of processing, picturing him ill and things that, just we go through as kids. And, um, but I believe he met his maker, or he's in the process of continuing to meet his maker. And hopefully he's going through some evolvement.
You talk about sort of picking up the pieces of yourself. What is that like?
It's arduous, it's consistent. The way that our brains are made is that we have an amygdala and hippocampal areas. So, unless we get a lobotomy, we're always going to have certain triggers. And what I did in adult survivors, because I would hear these words, core wounds, triggers, love yourself. And I was like, yeah, but, do you have a manual? Like, how do we get there? And so I took Eric Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, and instead of doing it how it's taught on the positive side of parenting, I did it on the upside down side. So it's
Mm.
trust versus mistrust. I
Mm.
focused on mistrust. If you come out of the first 18 months of life with mistrust, what happens when you enter autonomy versus shame and doubt?
Shame and
And what
doubt.
happens to you if they start to stockpile, right?
Mm.
When can you actually start changing? And for me, it's 38 to 45 is when you can start where development intersects with the midlife crisis, where the Uranus return intersects with the midlife crisis, ironically, the second midlife crisis. And when can you start to unpack all that's happened? And it's about 38 to 45. And that is when everything ended for me. And I didn't even know that until after, and I began to study in my own way because none of the books were working. And I
I
learned,
like that.
right? I learned about shame and core wounding. And I take every reader through his entire psychosocial development so that, and I give them reflection questions. So stage one would be pre-verbal and precognitive. But I have these reflection questions on, if something bad happens in your life, do you trust that you'll have a group full of people to help you through it? Most
Mm.
survivors go, yeah, no.
Mhm.
So I don't need to know how you were treated in your first 18 years. I just need you to answer the questions. And this gives us our core wounding, where our wounds are, is that we don't trust. We feel shame. And then we can find the whys. And my book leads you through all of that so that now when you go, oh, yeah, I got triggered into this core wound and it makes me not love myself, right? Instead of like, love yourself, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that today. Okay. Love you, Sherry. Great girl. But like, you don't really know how because you don't even
They
know.
don't, they don't, they don't, and that's usually the first complaint is like, "How do I even love
Just love
myself?"
yourself. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, you learn if you're lovable by how your parents love you. And I
Yeah.
wasn't loved. So, okay, I'll go do that. So great. So it's flippant. It's almost offensive to tell a
Yes.
survivor, well, just love yourself. Okay, but I hate myself. I was hated. I wasn't wanted.
Or you
But
don't know what love looks like, you've never seen it before,
at all.
except in a rom-com or something like that, but you've never actually seen it in real life and been able to point out, "This is what safe, emotionally healthy, non-violating love looks like."
Amen. Because we don't know. I learned that those who love me also abuse me.
Mhm.
So guess what
Mhm.
I did? I picked lots of people to abuse me because I thought that was what love
Yeah.
was me being an underling, was me having to fix it. I was like the row the boat girl. I'm going to row the boat. I'm
Yeah.
going to fix the relationship and row the boat. No more rowing the boat. We deserve reciprocity. We deserve other things. But in order to find that kind of love, you have to work through your triggers. And I get so much feedback, so many personal messages on this book. And one of the things I get the most on is, I never knew how to love myself until in your book you said, love yourself as if you're your own child.
Mhm.
And if you're not a parent, then love yourself as if you were your own pet, whatever it is, however you would take loving care and respectful care of something. You have to learn to treat yourself like that in your hardest moments. And that does seem to resonate with people.
And, I like the fact too, you're loving yourself differently, but I also think you're also saying love your parents or accept your parents for their toxicity, and that's a different type of love. I
I
think, or
think
that
it's
should evolve into a different type of love
that's
because
right.
before it was self-sacrificing, all that type of stuff. And so helping people to understand that there's like different levels, like basically give yourself the love that you were giving them and, basically love them how you might have been loving yourself.
Absolutely. And I do think that you don't want to spend, I think resentment and bitterness, those are stages that are really healthy to go through, but you don't want to get stuck there. The
Mhm.
cutting ties doesn't have anything to do with hate. I don't hate anybody that I've cut ties with,
Sure.
but I do not like them
Mhm.
and I don't have any respect for them. And if I don't respect someone, it means I don't trust them. And we can't genuinely love anyone we don't trust. But as a
Mhm.
human being, I don't want horrible things to happen to any of my family members. I just
Mhm.
want them to leave me alone. and I want to live my own life. I'm not like them. I don't fit into their dynamic. That's okay.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't hate and I don't feel resentment and I don't feel bitterness. I accept them and honor them for exactly who they choose to be. And because who they choose to be doesn't work for my mental health and well being, I choose to set boundaries around those things.
Love it. I love it. Well, we've come to the end of the hour, Dr. Sherrie. It always goes so
Thank you.
fast when me and you
I
get
know
together.
it does. It's like this. I've just turned in my one-page synopsis for a new book, and it's going to be focused only on toxic parents. My
Mhm.
books seem to be kind of going outside to the working into the core. So um, that's going to be an exciting thing to look forward to as well. But
I
right now,
love it.
go grab Adult Survivors. You can listen to my podcast, Therapy Sessions, Cutting Toxic Family Ties.
I
There's
love it.
lots of this on there. So Melanie,
Absolutely.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Such a kindred spirit, and
Absolutely.
I adore you. So I appreciate your work.
And likewise, thank you so much, Dr. Sherrie. Okay, so you just heard the episode with Dr. Sherrie Campbell and I. What were your thoughts? Love to continue the discussion. Please leave a comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're connected with me on social media, when this post goes out, definitely, leave your thoughts. Love the engagement. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves. And I'll see you around. And be well. Bye bye. Check out the sneak preview of next week's episode.
So I got into, so we're both therapists, right? So of course, we both learn about attachment disorders and all
Yes.
that stuff, right?
Yes.
And I knew all that before I got into recovery for sex and love addiction. So I was
Mm,
introduced to 12-step programs. Well, what made it so unique for me, and I think what's made it so unique for the people that I serve and why I use this language, is because no one really put to words the intensity of the obsession and the attachment that happens to these people in relationships.
mm,
You literally go through symptoms of withdrawal when you are in love addiction. So panic attacks, inability to eat. So all the things that people have whenever they go through breakups
yeah.
suck for everybody.
Yeah.
But the suicidal thoughts, love addicts will stalk. Love addicts will ruminate and not be able to get out of bed for an extended period of time. Love addicts will keep going back to relationships that are toxic and abusive to them.